Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. We're here on the night of December the 18th, and this better be, this show is going to have to last a little while. Those of you who are aware of how this works, we are live on a Tuesday evening from 6 to 7 p.m. And so you can tell we're live because usually the phone number is up on the screen. The phone number for call-in, by the way, is 640-3091. Manchester Community Television will not be recording next week, so this would otherwise be on Christmas night. So and then the following week, we won't be. There won't be a recording either because it's New Year's. So, actually, this show is going to have to be good enough to last for 3 weeks. So, first of all, let me wish you all an early happy Christmas. If this show is on, it actually runs, I think, on Christmas Day. So, I hope you're not getting indigestion from overeating or anything, but it's a wonderful time of the year and a time for family and friends. I know I'm looking forward to it. My kids are around, and my wife and I and our kids will be having dinner together with friends, etc. And it's time to enjoy it. I happen to noticed somebody the other day. Hang on, we got a call coming in here, I believe, or maybe not yet. We got a hello. Go ahead, caller. Hi, caller.
Hello?
Hello. Yep.
Hi, Jim?
Yes.
Hi, first time caller, long time listener.
Hi, Ricky, is it?
Yeah.
Hi, Ricky. How are you? Thank you for calling.
Good. I just wanted to pass on. I think it's really terrible what's happening with the Manchester School Department. You're talking about the stuff with Gerard and emails, and now we got this principal that's on the news saying she was let go incorrectly, and it's just crazy.
Mm-hmm. Troubling times.
I'm a homeowner here in Manchester, and part of the big picture is getting the schools back up. Helps property taxes, helps standard of living, helps everything.
Right.
And I appreciate you going on and digging into what's happening with Manchester, and I really hope that someday it might clear up. But boy, it seems to be getting worse and worse. So I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Rick.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Rick, and Merry Christmas. I appreciate the call, or Merry Happy Holidays. Thank you for calling in. You know, there's, as they say back home when it was home in Ireland as opposed to here, there was a saying about, well, there's eating and drinking in that. It's quite a meal. Yes, there's a lot going on, and I don't want to waste any more time on the email issue. I think it stemmed from what I think was an inappropriate action, and then the behaviour afterwards. I was. The idea of sort of playing fast and loose with things and leaking stuff to the press that Mr. Scannell did, etc. The whole thing leaves the school board looking in a very poor light. But I have to say this. I'll go to the issue of the Webster School principal thing in a second. But if I were to critique or criticise the Manchester Board of School Committee and the Manchester Mayor, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, who are fully involved here, because in the end they're the ones who are managing the purse strings. We could talk about this. Obviously, we do talk about it a lot, and we could talk about it forever. But for all their discord and the lack of focus on the bottom line about how we deliver the best education possible to the students and families of Manchester. That is lost in the bickering and infighting and all the rest of it. And when we're not doing that, we're spending our time congratulating ourselves about the wonderful things that are happening in the Manchester School District. And of course, I have kids in the Manchester School District. If I thought it was dysfunctional and it didn't work at all or would damage them or they would be hurt, then my kids wouldn't be there. I know there are great things happening in our school district every day, but those things are happening despite our public representatives, not because of them. I do not understand, and I don't know how, in good conscience, those people who are on the school board, people who are friends of mine, people who I respect, at the end of the day, they're going to have to account for their time on the Manchester School Board. And if you've been a member of the Manchester School Board in this current board, or the preceding board, or the board preceding that, or the board preceding that, then you have overseen a system that you have to know, is a system that has been defunded and attacked financially over more than a decade. And we can talk about any particular incident you want, but when we know that we have a system that is the least well-funded school system in the state of New Hampshire, I'm not going to stop saying it. It annoys people because they don't want to talk about it. Our taxpayers in Manchester pay less for schools than every other taxpayer in the state of New Hampshire. Now, I understand the overall tax burden. I have a pretty decent property tax burden myself. I understand that, but we still can't be lying to each other about the truth of the matter. If you moved and went and lived someplace else, you'd be paying more for education than you would here in Manchester. We pay less than everybody else on a per-student basis. That's a simple fact. And we have the least number of adults in the room per student of any school district in the state. That's another truth. And so the school board and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen like to point fingers at each other. I really dislike the holier-than-thou attitude and the sort of what are they doing over there stance of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, as though they weren't the city fathers and mothers of this city, that they weren't the people who had the ability to actually fix this or lead on this or seek solutions for this. But oh no. They're fine. Bring them a little problem and, give them something that there's an extra $10,000 needed for, and they're fine with that. But the fact that we have school after school after school, classroom after classroom after classroom, that doesn't have the number of teachers in it that we need, that kids are not getting the services that they need, that we are sailing as close to the wind as we can sail, and we do this all the time. And then, I don't know if the right word is cover up or not, because it still seems reasonable or bordering on what's reasonable that, we can't disclose for personnel reasons and all the rest of it. I know that there have been communications over recent years on the back end of this system, stuff that has been exchanged about people being aware of the problems in the system. That, I've seen messages that have been exchanged between people that recognize the level of the problem. But, it's like I have quoted a few times from, I love the scene in the movie A Few Good Men, or is it A Few Good Men? Yeah, and when Jack Nicholson says he's talking about being on duty down in Gitmo, and he says when being cross-examined, he says, "What is it? Deep down inside, in places that you don't like to talk about at polite parties, what we do. You need us, but you don't like to talk about it in polite company." So I'm sorry I didn't have that quote exact this time, but our school board members are aware, or unless they're being willfully ignorant, in other words, choosing not to see it, are aware of the fact that our staffing levels are not adequate, that our compensation levels for our subs and pars are not adequate, that the system has been stripped to the bone by some politicians, some who've already left and gone on to careers elsewhere or have decided to move on. The history of the public school system in Manchester in recent years is dotted by people who have come on the school board, so-called fiscal conservatives, who swear by the fact that there's wastage in the system, and, oh, by the way, they won't put their kids in it, but they will come in and do the dirty work of trying to find places to cut and cut and cut. And the truth of the matter in recent years is that they've left the school district with their tail between their legs, quietly and not run again, because they couldn't find the so-called wastage that they claim to have found. But nobody is standing up and saying enough is enough. We cannot continue to defund, in real terms, to defund our school district year after year after year after year. If costs are going up by 5% and you're only funding at 1%, then the fact is you have a 4% decrease in services. And that has been going on year in and year out. So I get annoyed sometimes, to be honest, at people who will, and I will deal with the Webster situation in a second, but people get upset about the Webster thing because it's sort of and it's an inflection point. It's a point of conversation that's sort of easily understood, and like, what's going on here? But you know, when there's 29 kids in a kindergarten class, forget about special needs. Just push that to one side. Just a regular kindergarten class, and you have 29 kids in a class with no assistant. I was criticized in the past for describing it as warehousing children. We can go back to, and I know people don't want to visit this either, we can go back to the 42 kids in a math class in a middle school in Manchester, and there were people making excuses for that. Some saying that it was okay. Some said, "Oh, we're going to find out the educrats are going to be going to learn that you can teach math to 42 kids in a class." So this stuff is mundane and goes on every day. The fact that you put 30 kids into a classroom and you put a teacher in there who you expect to perform at his or her optimum day in and day out, responding to all the, not just educational needs, written small print about education, deliver the curriculum, but all the issues that kids needs, their emotional needs, their social needs, their physical needs, their mental needs, all of those things are part of a little community of 30 kids in a class. And then we want people to stand up and talk about, well, there's bullying here, and, my daughter got this, and why didn't my son get that? It's very clear where the problem is. When you have the least well-funded school district in the state of New Hampshire, when you're spending less per student than the average amount spent across the United States, and I'll say it again, we happen to live in the 5th or 6th richest state in the United States of America on a per capita basis. Go look it up. And I get tired of I'm sorry to be sort of agitated in this time of Christmas, when we ought to be thankful and grateful for our blessings and etc. But the idea that suddenly our school district has gone to hell in a handbasket is just simply not true. Now, we do have, to get into the Webster thing for a minute, I want to tie it in with a couple of other things. We do have a piece on today's Union Leader, at least it's on the Union Leader online, a piece of video taken on someone's phone at Memorial High School of a kid getting a slap in a corridor, being slapped across the face. I haven't seen it. It just was released today, and I haven't had time to look at it, to be honest. But this comes on the back of the girl having hair pulled out at Central High School 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then we have the incident that was reported about former principal Sarah Lynch at Webster High School, and her being attacked. Now, I have to tell you that that would make it look as though our schools are out of control, and that there's no discipline or whatever else, and nothing could be further. This is a nuanced point that I'd like you to understand. Nothing could be further from the truth. What is true is that the staff there are maxed out trying to ensure that kids are getting the services that they need and that control is kept. We eliminated an assistant principal at Central High School last year, and Mr. Vaccarezza, the principal there, went into City Hall, and he went to the board and basically was pleading for another teacher. Said he had to have that assistant principal. That he doesn't have an assistant principal for each building. He's got a whole building with no assistant principal in it, and that means there's no capacity. What happens when someone is busy with something else? What happens when there's a real problem in a corridor over here? You know, when you've got a principal coming before you and telling you, I have to have an assistant principal, he's either wrong and exaggerating, and therefore his competency should be questioned, and people should say, I think you're incorrect, and we're not. But no, we simply won't fund it. We didn't give him the assistant principal he needs. So what does our principal do at Central High School? And this is repeated across other schools. He goes down and does cafeteria duty and does, corridor control duty while trying to run a large school. We have a caller. Go ahead, caller. Welcome. Who's this? Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hi. Who's this?
Yeah. It's Jim. How are you?
Hi. Hi. How are you?
I'm all right. Happy holidays, buddy.
Happy holidays to you. So fun time.
Again, thank you for getting the word out.
Yeah, fun times at Manchester schools, right?
Oh yeah, but I don't. What you just said that doesn't mean schools are out of control. I don't want to go on a record as saying that they are.
Right.
That's not my point. But I'll give you a couple of highlights. How many police officers are there at Central?
2.
Okay, so 1 wasn't enough, right?
Right. I presume, yeah.
So enough said, right?
Right.
You have a cop, a police officer, at a high school.
Yeah.
That wasn't enough. So now you need 2?
Yeah.
What's the next thing? 3? 4?
Yeah.
5? Somebody said to me today, and it made a lot of sense, a lot of the issues that the district's dealing with right now are a fallout from past administrations because they just really didn't fund properly. They didn't fund special education properly.
Right.
And sooner or later it catches up with you, and now we're starting to see that. And I'm not saying that's the whole problem or the whole situation or the whole challenge, but that's certainly a piece of it.
Right.
There's a whole gamut of other things that are happening,
yep.
At a fast speed that's hard to keep up with. But that certainly is one of them. We never had the systems in place to deal with the kids that needed the most help.
Right.
And you can put a Band-Aid on it for a while. It's like a dam, right? You can block it for a while. But sooner or later, the water breaks through.
And by the way...
Unfortunately, now the guys that are driving the boat, and you can see it already with the finger pointing, they might get blamed for it. Well, they're doing the best they can to make up for past mistakes.
Right. Right. Well, I it's clear. It's clear that we know that that we have been defunding programs and not funding programs properly for many years, and everybody knows this. I mean, the school district is on record boasting about the fact about how they didn't put kids in out of district placement, and how they save money by not which is code words for saying we didn't give the kids the services they needed. And oh, look what I did. I managed to, stop 5 more kids this month from getting the services they needed because I wouldn't give them their services. And and I know that if you don't lawyer up in Manchester and go in and chest up to them and make them give you the services that your kid deserves, not wishes for, not would like to have, not bells and whistles, but what they actually need, that the city of Manchester won't do it. And the reason why they won't do it isn't because they're bloody minded. It's because they don't have the flipping money to do it. It's as simple as that.
Right. Yeah. And not only is what they need, it's what they have coming to them by law.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
So I think the well-intended administrators, and there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
Their hands are tied.
Right.
But it's like a tennis game. Well, is it the school board's fault, or is it the alderman's fault, or is it the administration downtown, or the building administration?
Right.
We got to stop playing that game. We all got to just sit out and say, here's the problem.
Well, this is why I was calling out the Board of Mayor and Aldermen earlier on, because, the Board of Mayor, I really dislike, and more increasingly all the time, I dislike the whole stance of I called it holier than thou, of our 14 aldermen and mayor sitting on one side, sort of tutting about what are those guys over there doing at the school board. And when they, if they don't know, and of course the awful truth is many of them don't know because they don't care about the schools enough, but they're in the position to actually do something about it. They're the ones who decide how much money the school district gets and whether we fire a bunch of teachers in any given year or not. And they've seen it go on year in and year out, and they're unwilling to do anything about it. But they love to point the fingers over at, albeit a dysfunctional school board that makes it easy to poke fingers at. But in the end, the whole system's under strain.
Well, let's put some names on it. Let's put some situations.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not attacking anybody personally, but
Yeah.
Pat Long's words were, he's going to the school board and he's learning how in-depth it really is.
Yeah.
Well, he not only was an alderman for a long time, he was chairman of the board.
Right.
And they were writing checks for hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right.
So if you're writing a check for hundreds of millions of dollars and you don't know what you're writing it for or where it's going, isn't that not the right thing to do? Isn't that kind of like,
Right.
maybe I should have known where it was going. Maybe I should have done my homework.
Right.
Because half the city budget or thereabouts goes
Right.
to schools.
But then,
So each alderman,
yeah.
just by definition, they should be experts on what's going on at the schools. But it's very convenient to say, well, that's not on our plate, that's on their plate.
Well, I actually don't agree with you there, because I'll tell you why I say this. I understand what you're saying, but half the problem with Manchester is that our public representatives, like the school board members, are trying to set themselves up to be educational experts. So they sit in those chairs offering their deeply held opinions that they pulled out of some orifice in their body 5 minutes earlier because they really know nothing about education. But, they've done 3 terms or 4 terms or 5 terms or half a term, and all of a sudden they're experts in education. I know that the role of a school board ought to be administrative and ought to be there to oversee policy. And when an administration, when the superintendent comes back and when principals come in front of you and say, we need the following things, sitting there pontificating because, you're offering your own opinions about education. We don't ask people to be qualified in education and have master's degrees in public school administration in order to run for a school board. But half of our school board, or more of them, that's the position they want to be in. I want them to get out of the way, appoint people who are good at doing their job, and then hold those people to account. So I take your point about, I do agree with you about the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, being totally unaware of what's happening in the schools. Let me just finish with this. What they are not unaware of is that people like me have been screaming at them for 10 or 12 or 15 years about the fact that that our schools continue to be funded less well than everybody else's and getting worse on a yearly basis. And they willfully choose to turn their back on all of that.
Right. And I would agree with that and say this. I agree with you in terms of school board members not being educational experts and needing to let the experts, drive
Right.
the bus, so to speak. The aldermen who can say, well, it's not up to us, we gave them their appropriation, now it's up to them. I think that's by convenience.
Right.
I really do believe they understand they have a responsibility, but it's easier to say, well, we don't know what's going on in the schools.
Right.
We're taking care of the city, they're supposed to do their job. And once that happens, they're supposed to do their job, and it's not up to us. And that's why I started with the $300 million or whatever it is, 190 or 250 or whatever it is. It's a lot of money. If you're writing that kind of check, you should know where it's going and where they're at and what they're going to do with it and what they need.
Right.
And what the shortcomings are before you even, and to say, well, we did our job, we sent the check, now we're done.
Right.
And to your point, so we can come to some type of agreement, not so we can come to some type of agreement, but we couldn't agree on this. They're really not they're not really being responsible.
Right. Well, yeah. I
Not
mean,
not even close. But it's convenient for them.
Yes.
It's convenient to pass the buck. We have an underfunded school district with many challenges, with all kinds of things that are going on. That it's a dynamic world. You got all kinds of things that kids need, and if they can't fund it, it's very easy to say, well, we went up 8, 10, 12, whatever the percentage is, to tax cap, non-tax cap, whatever it is, but after that, we're going to wash our hands of it.
Right.
That's pretty convenient.
Right.
And you get reelected.
Right. Well,
It's
when you
very
say,
convenient.
yeah, except that, fine, but the numbers you use are kind of, if you were saying 0.8 or 0.9%, because if we ever got 8 or 9%, I think, well, first of all, I'd have to be carted off because I'd be probably after having a heart attack just at the very thought of it. But, if we
That's
can.
my point.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the percentage. They're not doing what they're supposed
They're
to
not,
do.
they're not doing it. All right,
They're
Phil.
not even coming close. All right, I'll let you go back to your show. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you. Hey, and happy Christmas, happy holidays. Hi to the family, and maybe we'll see you over the Christmas at some point, and we'll have a glass of water or Coca-Cola.
Okay, buddy, back at you. Put some bubbles in
Yeah,
it.
Coca-Cola or something. See you,
All
man.
right,
Good
bye-bye.
luck. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, that's Phil Sapienza, a wonderful man, and is at the coal faces. People, I know it's kind of a silly saying, but he's in there working every day in our schools. We've had the principals of our schools go before the Board of Mayor and Aldermen now on a regular basis for the last at least 2 years, and there's a committee which the principals in our city have asked and have pushed to be reinvigorated and restarted. It's an education committee which has members of the school board and members of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen on it, and it meets infrequently, but in the end, it also has become a talking shop. It is incredible. When I see people, I don't want to name names and embarrass people, but I've seen there are some teachers who have gone before our school board and talked to them in over a period of time. I mentioned Pat O'Neill as an example, who last year, the year before, gave up of his time and went to the trouble of creating a narrative and then revealing it to the board over a period of, I don't know, maybe it was 10 or 12 or more meetings, and each month just gave them a piece of these are some of the things, and it was very respectful and very and moderate, and it completely fell on deaf ears. And then we have members of the board, Mayor and Alderman, and the school board mocking people. I've heard them ridiculed. They've ridiculed, how dare they come in and tell us this? Why are our so what do they think? Like when a principal from one of our schools, goes before the school board, like why do they think he or she is there? Like they had nothing else to do that night, so they decided to go in and talk to these people who really aren't listening anywhere, but they come in. And so when they say that they don't have enough this, they don't have enough that, there are shortages of this, that we're at a breaking point. I've heard principals say that not just our school system, but as a result our city is at a tipping point and something needs to be done. We're at a breaking point. Something needs to happen. And yet we have holier-than-thou supposed know-it-alls who have ignored that. God forbid that we ever get that the thing ever really blows up on us in a big way, because at that, there will be a taking of names at that point. And I am sorry to say this, but people I know and people I like, who've been on these school boards and who are on these school boards, they're overseeing this system. And I would go right to Mayor Joyce Craig, where she is today. Mayor Joyce Craig is the honeymoon is over. Joyce is a friend of mine, and I'm delighted that she was elected mayor. But I'm waiting to see, like, where's the rubber meet the road here? At what point are we going to actually hear, hear Mayor Craig stand up and say enough is enough? I'm tired of hearing the excuses about, well, we have a tax cap and there's nothing we do about that. Because if we ever actually tell the voters, though I know deep down in places we don't like to talk about at parties, that the tax cap has been part of the ruination of the Manchester School District over the last 10 years, but I won't talk about it as a public representative, because if I do, I might not get re-elected again. But somebody has to stand up and say that the Manchester School District cannot survive in the way in which it is surviving. So I'd like to hear Joyce Craig's response to the criticisms that are being laid, and hiding behind personnel, and it's a legal matter and sub judice and we can't touch it. Fair enough. Well, then don't do that. Why don't you go back and look at the transcripts of what the principals who came before the various boards in the recent past, and they have called out sometimes using code words because they also don't want to, they sit, it's funny. The dynamic at some of those school board meetings is you've got a principal sitting giving public testament for 3 minutes, 30 seconds, and they talk about 3 minutes. Nobody's going to respond but everybody knows about the unspoken elephant in the room a lot of the time, because there's stuff known to the members of the school board that's not in the public domain. There's stuff known to the principal that he or she is not able to speak about because they can't go public on it because their hands are tied behind their back and there's tape across their mouths, so they're stuck with it. So this goes on, and then we'll go on with the meeting, and we'll have some argument about whatever it is, who released what to who, and who said what, and who should have sent an email, and I should have been told, and I didn't get this notice, and you should have got that notice, and let's talk about it for 4.5 hours. There is no place to hide. Whatever about the people in there who have been attacking public schools and are sort of known to be less than favourable or downright anti-public schools. We know about them, or at least those of us who watch and pay attention know about them, but it's the people who would purport to be supporters of our public schools and who say all the right things when standing on the doorsteps. You cannot have been let me put it this way. Had I been a member of the school board, say in the last board, and I owned 2 years of the history of what has gone on in Manchester in the last 10 years, I'd be embarrassed. So every single person who has served on the board of the school district, who has not stopped a meeting at some point or at the end of the meeting made a proposal that and highlighted the fact that we need to add resources to our schools. And no, I will not sign off on a budget that eliminates more teachers. I will not sit here and try and justify when we're threatened with 28 layoffs and we reduce it to only 14 layoffs, and then we're all asked to call that a victory. It is not a victory. They shouldn't be happening in the first place. The year after the year of a reduction in staff that we've seen going on in Manchester, all sort of hidden from view because it's not rehiring people who are retiring or not replacing people who are leaving, but we're never going to, you'll hear people say we didn't pink slip anybody last year. No, but there were 28 people retired and you only replaced 14 of them. It is unconscionable. And I've said this to them, and it seems to be a waste of time. I don't wish any ill at all on the Manchester School District. But what we're hearing, the story out of Webster School, by the way, just as a caveat or a word of caution here, caveat emptor, buyer beware. The story of things that happened at Webster High School may not all be in the public domain yet. So just to be clear. But from the pieces that have been made public, whatever other issues might have gone on that haven't been made public yet, the fact is that the program for EBD, emotionally and behaviorally disturbed kids at Webster High School or Webster Elementary School. There's clearly a problem there with kids not having resources. I've known that kids in middle school who've been left just left without resources. I know of kids that have physical and mental disabilities who've been left to languish. With an assistant who is there to sort of just make sure that they don't do any self-harm. But other than that, that's the nature of their, instead of getting physiotherapy that they require because they may be in a wheelchair, they may have difficulty moving, they may need speech therapy, they may need lots of things, and they're supposed to get it, and they get it, if at all, they get 4 hours a week when they should be getting 4 hours a day, or 1 hour a week when they should be getting 1 hour a day. This goes on and on and on, and the dirty little secret is that people in Manchester are fully aware of it. The members of the school board who want to go on talking about, look at the things we're doing and there's great things happening in our school district, that's fine. But it's all just happy talk. I've used the analogy in the past, and excuse me if I'm repeating things that you're tired of hearing, but I've used the analogy in the past of visiting some, fictional third world despotic dictatorship somewhere in the African continent, where there's huge levels of child poverty and life expectancy is so low, and there's public health doesn't work and public schools don't work. But a king, a despot, a president, or whatever in one of these places, the street right outside the presidential palace will be perfectly paved, and the lawns will be perfectly manicured. And if you fly in there and you're from the United Nations or you're visiting from a foreign government, you'll be flown into the airport. You'll get a helicopter over and you'll land in front of the presidential palace, and you'll be shown, look at this wonderful country we have, and you won't be shown the squalor of the kids on the city dump scavenging for food between the seagulls and the rats. That image you won't be seen. So I don't want to be overly things may not be quite that in Manchester School District, but I can tell you this, that the system has been stripped to a level bordering on dysfunctionality, and school board after school board, especially this one, this one no different than any other, has overseen that and is seemingly okay with that. Let me tell you about a little incident that I had today, and I just it's just a silly little thing, but it isn't quite as it's a small little thing. But somebody sent me today as a sort of with a note of irony. They sent me. I try to stay away from social media. I'm more of a voyeur than I am a partaker, and people who know me will know that. I'm not known for going on there, certainly in the more recent years, of going on and spending inordinate amounts of time offering my deep thoughts on Facebook. But I'm looking today. There was a former teacher in Manchester who he sent me a picture, and the picture is it's a picture taken in the 1950s at a parochial school in the city of Lowell. Now it doesn't say that here, but it's not public on Facebook if you were to look at it, but that's what it is. And it shows a bunch of kids sitting in a classroom, and they're all sitting at desks with like inkwell holes in the corner of them, and there's a nun standing off to one side. And I did a quick calculation. It looks like there's 72 kids or so in this class. Now that there's some kids standing against the wall, so it may well be two classes actually, but even that would still be 236s. But it would appear from the rows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it looks like 6 rows, and there's about 9 back in each row, so 6 9s. In the old math is 54. So the comment was and then our public representatives. Now, before I go any further, I am going to sort of name who said things here, and I'm not trying to pick a fight with any of these gentlemen, because this is just I think they were being. They were being sort of. I don't think they were proposing any of these things as a policy or anything. So I don't want to malign them in any sense, because there are people I know and I like them, and I probably disagree with them on a lot of things. But so Alderman Keith Hirschman is the first to respond to the picture, and he says, just very quickly, he says 57 kids, 1 nun and 1 ruler. So that goes to the idea that back in the day the nuns could keep order, and it's kind of a joke from us, especially those of us who went to Catholic school. One of those nuns with a ruler, boy, you didn't cross them, right? And so these are the kind of conversations we'll have, in a kitchen, in a bar, chatting or whatever, back in the good old days. So then Jimmy LaHoo is the next one who's a member of the school board, steps in and says, and they went on to become the greatest generation. And then a gentleman says, I wonder what was allocated for the schools in the budget back then. Keith Hirschman responds, obviously being comical or attempting comedy, says, a box of chalk and milk money, right? So you can see where this conversation, I'm not trying to make this overly serious, right? Because that's not my point here. And then the guy says resulted in higher test scores, which actually is incorrect. But then facts don't matter. Another lady who's been involved in public school issues in Manchester as a parent for a long time, Patrice Bernard, responds: the nuns work for free or darn close to it, which was true. Parishes provided the building, the Catholic parishes, the building, and most Catholic schools were free to parishioners. This is true back in the day. Can't find too many places like that today, and I think that's sort of a statement of fact that it was a different time and etc. So this other person responds today. It's $150 million of the budget, which is inaccurate. It's actually 167, but $150 million budget, and the kids are not quite as prepared academically for the real world as they were back in the day. Also untrue. And then another gentleman who often opines on issues around public schools in Manchester, Michael Porter, who was one of those who was nominated to take a place on the school board recently. He says, but back then there was discipline in the home and respect for authority figures, aka teachers in the classroom. No FERPA, FAPE, no Office of Civil Rights telling districts how they could educate. So I think now we're getting to the meat of the matter, because I think we're actually saying that this is, so that's, first of all, it's all based on nonsense, because none of this is true. I responded, and I'll get back to that in a second. I responded with all these guys talking about this, about the glory days of the 1940s and 50s of kids sitting in classrooms with nuns, and how perfect it was, and how the test scores were great and kids were disciplined, and there was two parents sitting at home, and when Dad came in at night time, Mom was waiting with her apron after having baked a beautiful dinner, and she had a glass of whiskey waiting for him, some kind of, like the images one gets from the movies from the 1950s. So I said, is that one pair of those rose-tinted glasses that you guys are all sharing? Or do you each have one of your own? If you'd like the non-Disney World version of how life was in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, I'd be happy to educate you. So Mike Reporter responds, well, let's see. When we look at how kids behave in the classroom, we can most assuredly say that kids weren't concussing teachers, stabbing teachers, back-talking teachers. Why? Discipline. We have evolved in such a way as we excuse kids' behaviour rather than address it. Oh, Johnny has a behavioural plan, so it's okay for him to strike a teacher, disrupt class. That's something we shouldn't tolerate in the school system. Of course, there were negative things about the 40s and 50s, but let's face facts. Kids had a hell of a lot more respect for authority then than now. There's no evidence of that either, Mike. Then again, it requires parents to be involved with their children, but we have made excuses for parents to abdicate their responsibilities. So the reason why I bring this up is just because it's sort of a common theme, and I respect the people that I have named in that little piece. And so my purpose here isn't to attack them, and if you feel attacked, then it says more about you than anything else, because that's not my purpose. What I am attacking is the narrative around that there was a better public education system in the past. The nuns were there, and they had rulers, and they made sure there was discipline. If you talk back to Mr. Smith, he gave you a swipe around the side of the ear, and you went home, and your father gave you another beating, and that's how you learned. And they turned out to be great young men, and they all went off and became the greatest generation and fought for freedom, and it was all kumbaya and Pollyanna, and it's a load of happy horse crap. Because if you actually look at the photograph for a minute, if you look at the photograph that you don't see, but it's a black and white photograph of a bunch of kids in a schoolroom in Lowell back in the 1940s or 50s, first of all, you'll see that there isn't a single kid there who represents any kind of a minority. There are no Native American kids in that classroom. Guess they didn't need to apply. There aren't any African American kids in that classroom. They need not apply either. There weren't any religious minorities in that classroom. It's a Catholic classroom. It looks like with a Catholic nun in it. I don't know where the Jewish kids went. I don't know where the Muslim kids went. And by the way, there were Muslims living in America back then. Where did the Asian American people go? Where did all the other minorities go? That happy image you have doesn't work for that. And oh, by the way, I looked up statistics today in response to this, just because it bugged me, because when I see people using not even code words, but when you talk about, and the OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, wasn't telling people how to educate. What is it that the Office of Civil Rights has said to anybody to do or not do? Did the Office of Civil Rights perhaps say to Manchester, it has to come to an end, a time when kids who are non-white kids in the city of Manchester are less likely to be in AP courses and advanced courses than white kids are? Now, don't get all your panties in a knot about this, because it's just a statement of fact, and there's lots of reasons why it might be so. I'm not saying there's a bunch of, KKK clan guys standing in the corridors of our high schools waiting to implement racist policies. Just 1 second, I think we have a caller. Hi, do we have a caller? Hello? Sorry, caller, if you were there, call again. I missed your call. So did the OCR say perhaps that the city of Manchester schools needs to do a better job in representing all the kids? If you were in the so-called happy-go-lucky, beautiful world of 1940s America in a classroom then, what do you think it would have been like if you were, if you had any kind of emotional or physical disability? You know where you would be? You'd be at a workhouse somewhere. You'd be up at some, county home in Hillsborough. You'd be up in Concord in a red brick building with iron bars on it, and you'd be told you were dumb or stupid or mentally incapable, and you needed to be separated from society. That's what you would have done with them. That's where the other kids were. That's why there are no kids in there sitting in wheelchairs or with crutches or whatever else. The other thing is, just to be clear, if you really want to know, in the United States, it wasn't until the 1960s in the United States that we managed, when you take big sort of world health numbers or national health numbers, up until the 1960s, 1 in 3 children in the United States died by the time they got to their by the end of their 5th year. And it was only in 1960 or so that we managed to get to the point where only 1 child in 5 died before they got to the age of 5. So if you want to talk about child welfare and child poverty and hunger and starvation and disease and poor living conditions and lack of educational opportunity and outright discrimination, imagine being one of the girls in that. There aren't too many, but the girls who are in that black and white photograph, the best they could hope for? The best they could hope for was to go in the typing pool, if they ever were allowed to go to school old enough to get into the typing pool, and they could sit in the classroom going ding, 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 like warehoused in there, while the boys got to do mechanical drawing and woodwork and math, and if they were really bright and they were the right person's son, they got to do physics and chemistry and advanced math. But the working kids, the poor kids, the girls, the minorities, what did they get? The disabled, the intellectually challenged, the emotionally challenged, what did they get? They got roughshod over. That's what they got. So, with all due respects to the wonderful gentleman on Facebook today talking about how the greatest generation and all that happy horse crap coming out of some school system in the 1940s and 50s, it is a load of garbage. Because if you look at academic outcomes, the things that are stated in here that just aren't true, academic outcomes in the United States are better than they were in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. There are more students today in the United States going to university than ever did before. There are more kids as a percentage of the population attending trade schools and getting educated with certifications than there ever were before. The percentage of kids with high school graduated certificates as a total percentage of the population is higher than it's ever been before. Are there failings? Are there problems? There absolutely are. But having a school board member and a board of mayor and alderman, and I don't want to go off with you guys because I know you were just having some fun here today, so it's not about you personally. But this conversation going on, we have the others up in the choir singing about how our schools are ungodly and we took Christ out of the schools, and once we took Christ out of the schools it was all over. Well, Christ isn't out of the schools to start with, because you can go to any school in this Manchester School District this week and there are Christmas concerts on in all our schools, and those Christmas concerts, they're singing Christmas songs playing Christmas hymns and playing Christmas music. So these people, not these, but the people who are out there talking about our ungodly schools and we've given up on discipline, and it's all a load of crap. Excuse my four-letter word. It's nonsense. But that's what they want to talk about. Because what they don't want to talk about is that we need to fund our schools properly, and we have real needs, and those real needs need to be met. And instead of that, they're supporting people, and they're friends with people, and they agree with people who are up in Concord, stripping money out of the Manchester school system and passing it back down to taxpayers, while all the time walking around Manchester holier than thou, pretending that, we're trying to hold the fiscal line, and what can we do? Well, we just can't afford it. What can we do? Ladies and gentlemen, it's frustrating as all heck to be watching this going on. When the point is of that piece that I repeated there is that this like attack on that somehow the OCR and FERPA and these things are bad, that these are sort of the federal government stepping in to tell us what we can and what we can't do. Yeah, the federal government went down into Montgomery, Alabama, and made sure that the schools there were desegregated. That's what the federal government did, and if they didn't, they'd still be segregated. And let's be also very clear about something. If you look at the people who are attacking public education today, the people like Betsy DeVos up in Michigan. Well, she's now, of course, the Secretary for Education, but her work in Michigan to introduce voucher programs, etc. What we have seen, and you look at the actual numbers, not the jokes, not the anecdotes, the actual facts. And when you look at the actual facts, what do you see? What you see is the resegregation of American schools. That's what you see. It's like the flight to the suburbs. So now they get to take the money with them, pull the money out of the public schools, pull the money out of the city schools, and head off into some nice, one-class gated community suburbia where everybody can pull up in their SUV at their nice school, and they don't have to think about the places deep down inside that you don't want to talk about at polite parties. It is wrong from the top to the bottom, and it ought to stop. And of all the people in this state, I can understand the people of Windham or Bedford or Newcastle or Dover or some people saying, going along with the quid pro quo when they are already able to spend $20,000 or $25,000 or $23,000 per student on their kids, and their kids are going to do fine, thank you very much. But people in the city of Manchester, average working Joes and professionals, and people go to work every day and work 40, 50, 60 hours a week or run a small business. Those people in the city of Manchester going along with this nonsense instead of standing up and saying, as Manchester kids go, there goes the state of New Hampshire. You cannot have a city which is the economic engine of the state of New Hampshire. You cannot have a city like Manchester being left to rot and to, that's too strong a word, being left without the resources that it needs. Because it is true that people expect that they come to a city like Manchester for services. And if the people of, and the politicians representing them, if the people of Hooksett or Candia or Auburn or Londonderry or Goffstown or Bedford think that some magical line on the west side of Manchester at the halfway down Bodwell Road or halfway down whatever it's called, any of the streets in Manchester, that some line over in Penardville or another line over on River Road or some line down on Route 28, that suddenly, that everything changes once you cross this magic invisible line. No, that's not the way life works. So the people of Manchester need to hold their public representatives to account. The issue of the stabbing, as it's called in Webster School, I know nothing about it. I don't know if it was a 12-inch blade, a machete, or the tip of a pencil. I don't know. I have no knowledge about that. But I would caution this, and this doesn't mean that it's better or worse or everything else. But the word stabbing it carries quite a lot of weight with it. When a teacher, if your skin is punctured by a pencil, then you've been stabbed. I want to be at pains to point out that when I go to visit Manchester schools, I see them all the time, and I see them. They are orderly, and they are. And discipline is imposed, and there's nobody running wild in those schools, and nobody should have any qualms about that. Now, is the system bursting at the seams? Absolutely. Are there teachers there are people leaving all the time. They're pulling out and saying good luck. And at some point, the City of Manchester has to stop the rot. And the problem is that the current body of politicians who we have are too narrow-minded, too small-minded, not brave enough or bold enough. Frankly, they're not leaders. There's not leadership there because they're not leading on this, the single most important topic in the City of Manchester. Manchester Proud is out there, and a wonderful initiative on behalf of the business people in the community of Manchester to look at Manchester schools and see what needs to be done and how we might move forward. And we have public representatives already disclaiming and tutting it because they think it's going to be a foregone conclusion because you're not talking to the some segment of the population or something. The doors are wide open. You can talk to anybody you want. The problem actually is in that case is what your problem is that you don't get to have as loud a voice there as you do otherwise, representing 0.01% or 2% of the opinion in the city. So we have a lot of work to do, ladies and gentlemen. The good news is 2019 is coming, and I wish you all a happy new year too, because 2019 is coming, and before the end of 2019, all of you watching this program will have an opportunity to vote for a new mayor, a new board, and a new school board, and a new board of mayor and aldermen, if you so wish. So. That opportunity is coming. The people who are on those boards, let me tell you right now, you've got, if you're a newer member, you're halfway through your term as of now. So I don't know what you did, to be honest, for the last 12 months because you haven't attacked or done anything about the fundamental problem facing Manchester school districts. None of you have stood up and said, I won't sit here and allow this system to continue to be defunded and underfunded in the City of Manchester. You've acquiesced to it. The nicest of you, who I like and are friends of mine, and might be cross at me for saying it so boldly, but you have acquiesced to it. You've allowed it to happen on your watch because you have not stood up and said this has to stop. I have said before, if it were I was on that school board or on the board of mayor and aldermen, there wouldn't be a meeting finish any night before I had made a proposal to fund our schools more properly, and to form a delegation to go up to Concord to demand of the governor that the City of Manchester needs its school system properly funded, and furthermore to push our congressional delegation to do the same thing. That would be a monthly echo that would happen in that board, so long as there were children in the City of Manchester sitting at desks and tables in rooms that are overcrowded, with teachers that are undervalued and overly stressed, and a system that won't give the kids the things that they, as Phil pointed out earlier on, not just what they need, but what they have been legally, what is legally required to give them. We refuse to give them that. So let me take a couple of minutes here as we approach the end to catch a breath and say the world isn't coming to an end. The City of Manchester schools are still doing wonderful things. They're wonderful. Many of you will be out at concerts and shows and looking at academic results from classes and progress reports and all those things in the coming days and weeks as schools come to a close. And there are lots of fun things. When you walk into your kid's concert this week, whether it's a 4th grader or an 8th grader or a 12th grader, and you see talented kids doing talented things guided by talented teachers, you'll be forgiven for thinking that this is all wonderful, and it is. But let there be no mistake that a real job of work needs to be done in the city of Manchester, and we need to get to it. We can only pray for a brighter future. Those of us who do pray, I think it's worth. We should be praying for that. But where what thoughts and prayers get you in the end without some resolve. I would encourage people to stand up. Talk to their public representatives, demand action, demand more clarity, demand more openness, tell them to cut out the dysfunctional behaviour and lead Manchester into a brighter future. I'll leave you with this, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas. If you're seeing this after Christmas, I hope you've had a wonderful Christmas. Take your time with your kids, cherish them, spend time with them, hold them tight, hug them, talk to them nicely, offer them encouragement, listen to them when they're talking to you. Enjoy your Christmas, enjoy your holiday, and we'll see you all here in a couple of weeks. I appreciate you listening tonight. Thank you. God bless you all. From Jim O'Connell. Goodbye now.